Perfect. I'm delighted to introduce Hanna Derets. Hanna did her undergrad in applied maths at Dnipropetrovsk State Technical Uni in Ukraine, and is now doing a master's in applied maths at the University of Waterloo, where I gather that the interests of the group are diverse, but include discrete event dynamical systems and algebraic methods and algorithms. Thanks for coming remotely to give a talk at Neuromonster, and when you're ready, over to you, about 20 minutes so that we can have maybe a little bit of time for questions at the end of we're getting close to the end of the day, but when you're ready, far away.
Okay, so I can start?
Please do.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm Hanna, and I'm gonna talk about Epsilon machines and analysis of the EEG microstate sequences using them. And let's start with what are the microstates. So having electrical signal from all of the electrodes, the global brain activity or response to the event is usually measured and can be described by global field power, GFP, calculated from all of them simultaneously. And the local maxima of GFP correspond to the strongest field strength and highest topographic signal-to-noise ratio. So we consider topography at this time moments of local maxima of the GFP. And there are two remarkable properties. First, although there are many possible different topographies, a majority of the signal can be represented by just a few of them. And these maps, they don't gradually morph into each other or overlap in time. They instead, single map dominates for about 100 milliseconds, and then they abruptly transition to another map. So these periods of quasi-stability of single maps is called microstate. And the whole signal can be represented as alternating sequence of these microstates. And in the same signal, we have a choice, some options on which temporal resolution we want to process it. The main reference is still this global field power peaks. And the first thing is to derive sequences from this. But we can also either add some more information about durations of this microstates by sampling the signal, for example, every 4 milliseconds, or we can, in contrast, concentrate on the transition to new microstates, as you can see in this picture, just reporting where a transition happens. So from the same recording, we get data in the 3 different time scales to analyze. So the data considered in this study comes from 2 groups of participants, experienced meditators, which are supposedly better concentrating on the task, and meditation-naïve healthy controls with 20 participants in each of these groups. The recordings were done in 3 different conditions: mind wandering, verbalization, and visualization, where the first one is just resting state with a task to relax. And for the 2 others, they were asked to repeat silently the word square or visualize a square repeatedly for 3 minutes at individually convenient pace. So recordings with the 3 tasks were repeated twice with 3 repetitions for each mind mode, which gives us the total duration of each run, 18 minutes. Now we set the goal to distinguish the groups of participants or the cognitive mode based on the EEG recordings using Epsilon machines, and also gain some information about typical states or transitions. Just a couple of words on motivation of this approach. So on the considered data set, using a standard statistical tests on the parameters and pairwise transitions, we are not getting any significant results on both group level or separating mind modes or their interaction. And going, using Epsilon machines, we can go from just microstates or transitions from letters to grammar. We can actually gain some information about syntax of EEG, and construct generative models. It gains some information about dynamics. Moreover, causal state that we gain in this Epsilon machine, exploring the grammar of underlying process, has predictive power, which also gives us more information about the patterns. So we suppose that we consider discrete time, discrete valued stochastic process, which we can only observe, and we want to be able to predict future events that are going to happen based on what we've already seen and what we already learned from this process. And assumptions that we have here is that process is stationary and its characteristic doesn't depend on the time, but it depends on the history, on the sequence of events that we just happened. We assume that the system transitions between states, which we can learn looking at the history. So all the histories lead the system into some state, which actually brings us to the constructing a partition of histories that lead the system into the same state that are called causal states. Usually, ideally, we want to look at all available histories and construct the prediction for infinite futures, which is generally impossible. So we make assumption that we can just do all of that looking at the finite histories and futures. So the model that follows from all of that is finite probabilistic automaton called Epsilon machines. Which is built from series of discrete observations represented by finite alphabet, which has parameters for the construction, to which history we go in the past and in the future. And after it's constructed, is described by the set of causal states, transition function, which determines what is the next state based on the current state and the input event, and the probabilities of observing each event depending on the current state of the system. This model has a property that it has minimal statistical complexity. So it aims to minimize the retained information, having still the same prediction. That is, given EEG microstate sequences, we want to construct Epsilon machine by classifying observed algorithms in the causal states, looking at the probabilities of transitions. And the result we're getting after that is such a probabilistic DFA, where for every state, we have to define transition with every of the 4 letters, which are our microstates, because we assume that when we transition to a new microstate, that actually some event happens to the system, which can be denoted by the same letters. The probabilities on every age define the probability of observing this event, while transition with every of them is well defined, is not probabilistic. And every node here, which is the state of the machine, actually contains information about the set of histories, the set of algorithms, observations given in our data. And explaining the algorithm of its construction on the high level, we first say that initially we assume that all observed algorithms, they belong to the different states, so they bring the system into different states, which is called pre-epsilon machine, and we can define probabilities by transition frequencies. Then we compare predictions from every pair of states, looking at all possible future of the fixed lengths. So for every 2 states, we look at the sequence of transitions, and we set some thresholds on how different they can be, because by definition, we wanted the same futures, so this probability should be equal, which we practically don't have, so we relax it to up to some threshold. So how do we compare the states? If we want to check X and Y for this particular future CAB, we know deterministically all the transitions. And on this ages, we have probabilities that we just compare one by one. After we're done with that, and we know which states are supposed to be identified, supposed to be merged, this can happen that they can have different transitions with the same event. As in this picture, two states labeled as X can differ in some of the transitions, which means that in addition to merging them, we should also merge all descendants, as we want to make sure our model is still deterministic, all the transitions. After that, we recalculate transition probabilities as we have new causal states based on all algorithm members. And we repeat this process while we still have something to merge, as we're supposed to construct the minimal system, which has the same predictive power. So after we have Epsilon machines, we need some tools, some measures of how we can compare them. The first is pretty obvious, but it can already explain something about statistical complexity of the machine, is number of causal states, but it doesn't have any information on transitions or what's inside and how it relates to the EEG data. Actually, looking inside the states, we can check the partition of history as every node corresponds to the set of n-grams identified as equivalent. So we can study which of them have the same predictive power. And if we want to look at the probabilities, we can either try to find the best match for each sequence. We can try the machine that matches the best, maximizing likelihood, or we can calculate the distance between two machines. One more thing is that for every automaton, we have associated semigroup, and we can also study its algebraic complexity. So the probability distribution is usually compared with L1 norm as we go through all observed n-grams and check the probability from the causal state it's related to. These metrics also have some information about the partition of causal states from two different machines. The second one is the variation of Jacquard distance metric, when we try to learn in the case if the transition frequencies are the same, but the same state is observed much more often in one of the machines than in another. We want this to actually be reflected with this distance. The first type of distance can be also applied if we want to compare Epsilon machines constructed on the different history lengths. So going back to our data set, we have two groups, and we want to first check separability of these two groups. While we have 20 participants, we consider group level Epsilon machines, so we construct them on EEG microstate sequences concatenated over all participants. And instead of 20 machines for each of this process, we have just one group level machine for two machines for each of the processes. Varying history lengths from 1 to 7, and this gives us temporal windows for each of the time mode. And the first approach is construct the group level Epsilon machines, then look at the pairwise distance metrics embedded into Euclidean space and check separability of 2D projections, which gives us very good results for all time scales. Considered parameters involve lengths from 1 to 7, and threshold varies in whole range with this step. And we can see that almost in all cases, the separation is present. Moreover, what is observed is that when we minimize machines, we can actually get better clustering and bigger margins separating the groups, because we can already look at the distances between pre-Epsilon machines, but minimizing its statistical complexity, we can get better results.
Now I interrupt briefly I just want to accelerate you a little bit so that there's time for a couple of questions and also for the last talk, which is an invited talk. So can we sort of do it in the next 2-3 minutes so that people can ask you a couple of questions?
Okay, strong.
Thank
The
you.
second approach is to use another separation criteria when we require the distance between the machines of the same group to be smaller than the distance between different groups. And this gives us more strict criteria, and they should actually be well clustered. We don't have any loss via embedding, loss of information. And as this separation is not that open, we can learn what are the optimal parameters that gives us better clustering of these two groups. So again, varying the parameters, we can see that separation is present, but in this time is around 20 cases from all like 800 of parameters. And the natural question if this is just a random phenomena, and we see that just by chance, which we can check just considering permuting label assignments and trying to separate fake groups, which fortunately doesn't give us any positive result for the separation of the group. But repeating this for the separation of mind modes, when we look within one group of participants and compare mind modes, we can conclude for sure that visualization has better results, but sometimes for the fake label assignment, the separation is present, so it doesn't give significant result at this moment and is still part of the future work. And just quickly explain how we can zoom in into Epsilon machines, because when we learn some information using just metrics, machines, and some measures based on them, we still want to go back and explain the results in terms of EEG microstate sequences and what's happening in the brain. So if we have the machines, we have distance metric, we have embedding, which we just see 2 points. Looking inside, we see already more information on how different the complexity of them is. Now, zooming inside each of the vertices, we can see what is the partition of histories. As looking at the old words, we can identify which of them were identified as equivalent and compare how it is for different groups, what is some typical partition. Or in addition to that, we can look at the probabilities of transition from the state, because this is just partition, explaining nothing about the future. But for n-grams, looking at their causal state, we can compare the contribution of l-grams into the distance, looking at the probabilities of future events from their causal states. And now these are partitions of n-grams from the previous slide. Taking the contribution, we can identify in the intersection of what causal state we have the biggest impact into difference between these two machines, and give the explanation of separation phenomena in terms of microstate sequences, which can be further related to some functional significance or properties of the process. For the conclusion, alternative method for Epsilon machine construction was suggested in this work. Some methods for comparing machines, analyzing the data are presented, such as sequence likelihood, distances, separability criteria, and also the way of explaining learned information going back to the EEG microstate sequences is demonstrated. Some of the future work may be comparing it to the existing algorithm, develop an approach for individual data, as we had non really significant results for the mind mode separation, which can be the results of individual differences, which is lost in the group level machines. And also we can conclude and recommend some parameter range, which is optimal for getting reliable results using Epsilon machines. So that's all I have. Thank you for the attention.